right. So this is a special week, and this is really honoring a lot of the leaders of the Recovery Month effort and the recovery as a whole movement this week. And so I'm really pleased to have a good friend who I've known some time in all of his efforts to really put a face and voice on recovery, but to really shift the way our society deals with addiction and embraces recovery. So Tom Coderre, who now currently is a chief of staff for SAMHSA, is doing wonderful work. And so, Tom, I just want to thank you for joining me.
Oh, thank you, Dan. It's great to be back with you here. And it's been a long time since we've had an opportunity to catch up, so this is great.
Yeah. So thank you.
Recovery Month.
Yes, absolutely. Happy Recovery Month. So
Thank God you caught me at the beginning and not the end.
Yeah, no kidding. Oh, I can only. I've already seen some of the pictures on Facebook about your travels, so I can only imagine. But
yeah, last week was pretty epic. I mean, we did. We had our. We did a big event here at SAMHSA to recognize Recovery Month. The Tuesday after Labor Day, a recovery rally and wellness event. And Wednesday, our Recovery Month planning partners all came in from all over the country for their annual meeting. And then Thursday was our Recovery Month press conference where we released the National Survey on Drug Use and Health data from last year, and our Recovery Month luncheon. And then I was in Richmond this weekend doing a recovery event. I went to the McShin Recovery Fest, which is actually a Kansas City sanctioned barbecue cook-off.
Oh, jeez.
Fantastic. And their theme is smoking meat, not drugs. That was pretty cool. Yeah.
So that's Carol McDade and John Shinholzer, who also huge leaders in this effort for years. And I miss my meetings with the planning partners. That was
you used to come all the time, right?
It was a hard decision. I was on the committee for 10 years. But it's so great to see the work continuing and all the great work just how things have grown is just phenomenal. To see other countries that are doing events.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
I saw a video of the recovery walk in Africa, and it blew my mind.
Oh, that's fantastic. So, Tom, I start every conversation with the same question that's so core to the work that I do, which is, what's the greatest gift that recovery has given you toward helping you be the man you always knew you could be?
It's a great question, and I haven't had a chance to really ponder it much. But
good.
But in this recovery work that I'm doing, my personal recovery work, not the advocacy or the public policy work that we were just talking about, but in my personal recovery work, I've come to really value the ability to be able to accept myself. And that's something that I didn't have prior to getting in recovery. In fact, it's one of the things that I used to drink and use drugs over, this lack of self-acceptance. And I think getting into recovery and being able to figure some of that stuff out has been the biggest gift for me.
And of course, self-acceptance or self-care is not necessarily high on the list of man rules or expectations for men. In fact, it's often been made fun of or even, demeaned.
Yeah, well, as a man, you're taught, right, to not, sometimes men are taught not to show their feelings or to suppress their feelings in a way that's pretty unhealthy, right? I mean, and there's somebody in one of the 12-step meetings I go to that always says nothing grows without water. As men, that's one of the first rules, right, that we learn is don't cry.
You got it.
It's not cool for a man to cry. And so we learn to suppress that feeling at a very young age. And And then we learn all the other rules that come along with it, right? About showing emotion, about loving other people, about who we can love and when we can love. And all those things are very, very scripted for us, whether it's society scripting them or other men scripting them for us. And we need to find our own place. That's the healthy answer. And the recovery answer is, where do we feel the most comfortable? Where do we find self-acceptance? Where do we kind of fit into this world? That's, I think, a really big gift of recovery. It's getting to explore that, and relearning some of the things that might have been taught to us that weren't necessarily true or healthy or right.
Yeah, that's well said. One of the big mantras or sayings of the recovery community is "to thine own self be true." Right? So what does that mean for men as we begin to, what I talk about it a lot of the time is, whether we see it or not, the recovery community really just restructures our masculinity and gives us a totally different permission, what I call relaxed masculinity, right? We can just feel more at ease in how we are able to express that, because it's supported, at least in the recovery community. And through that, we get the strength to bring that out into the rest of the world. And you had a fairly public, well, not fairly, you had a very public experience with your addiction that, for men, you're at the top of your game as a young star in politics in Rhode Island, and you experienced, a really devastating blow to your reputation, but to what men consider to be that ultimate sense of identity. So can you talk a little bit about that? Because you obviously have come a long way since then.
Yeah. I mean, you talking about that brought me right back to that time that I got arrested for possession of a controlled substance in my home city. And it became the news of the day, because I was a state senator in Rhode Island for 8 years. I had been out of office for about a month when I got arrested. So I was still pretty fresh on people's minds, and the news media loves a story like that. Lawmaker becomes lawbreaker is a great, it's a great storyline. So not saying that I didn't do something wrong, and not saying that I didn't deserve to go through that, but when you go through something like that, it's devastating, and it's humiliating, and I was ashamed of that experience. So I basically thought my life was over at that moment. Mm-hmm. And that was, that's what I was telling myself, right? As I was being hauled in front of a judge, as I had, handcuffs on, as I was on the front page of the statewide newspaper, or the subject of the nightly news on all 3 network television stations. That was the narrative that I saw. I was like, this is devastating. I'll never be in politics again. I'll never do anything again. In fact, I want to die. And if I don't die, I'll stick my head in a hole and never show my face again in public. And those turned out to be falsehoods and lies, right? Those, thank God, that's not the end of my story. I was able to get the help that I needed, get into, get psychiatric help, get into a treatment center, help for my substance use disorder. I was able to find recovery. I was able to get mutual support through 12-step fellowship. All these things that helped me deal with that devastating blow and flip the script, quite frankly, like turn that around and say, this is not who you are. This is what happened to you. Mm-hmm. And I think, for men in particular, like you said, I could have very easily allowed, the man rules, as you call them, to dictate that, right? But instead, I was taught to, whatever I expose in the light, right, is going to get better. And if I just hide my head in a hole, it's gonna fester in the darkness. And that's not the life I wanted to lead. And thankfully, folks said that doesn't have to be the life you lead, Tom. There's a solution to this. And so I went through that process of dealing with those things and emerged from the other side. I was able to go work. When I met you, I was working at Faces and Voices of Recovery as the national field director. I think I came out to, didn't I come out to Minnesota?
Yeah.
And well, you were working in the court system there, I think, at the time.
Yeah.
And the, I traveled around the country for 245 days for 2 years, helping build grassroots recovery advocacy organizations. I, left that job to go back to the state Senate where I once served and become the chief of staff to the Senate president. I left that job, after 5.5 years and became a senior advisor to the administrator here at SAMHSA and now chief of staff. So, obviously those, that doesn't have to be the narrative. You can change the narrative at any point in time. And those are just professional accomplishments. Never mind, how I feel about myself today, what we talked about around self-acceptance, gaining insight about who I am as a person and what my purpose is in life. Never mind about the relationships that I've been able to rebuild with my parents, with my brother, with my sister, with my 5 nieces and nephews. One of my oldest nephew just had a baby, so I have a grandniece now, which is incredible. The relationships I have, I think, are probably my greatest gift in recovery, right? It's building these relationships that are second to none. I never had relationships like that. A lot of my relationships were transactional. They were built around either politics or other transactional relationships, business. But now the relationships I have are based on, humanity. They're based on, connections, human connections, and how I interact with other people. And that's really powerful. That's probably the greatest gift I have in recovery.
And that is so wonderful. And one of the ideas that I was reflecting on is that, when I talk about the man roles, sometimes people hear it as like I'm saying that they're bad. But it's much more about consciousness, right? It's about being aware of them and not letting them rule our lives without awareness. And in many ways, if you think of some of the best attributes of what we consider to be more masculine, courage and integrity and leadership, and a resolve to not give up in the face of adversity,
right?
You used that, you exuded that, you brought that to bear to your journey. And so what I love is how a lot of the time in recovery, we find that balanced sense of being men. And so you can talk about self-acceptance. You can talk about the power of intimacy and relationships, while at the same time, be a strong leader and grounded in this really courageous journey that you've walked.
I love the fact that you talked about courage and being courageous, because I heard early on in my recovery that courage was not the absence of fear, but it's what you do in spite of it, right? And for me, that was really important to hear, because I was like full of fear around all these things, around my arrest, around my lack of self-acceptance, around issues that I was having with sexuality, all these things that I was scared to death to deal with. And when I heard that, I was like, oh, okay, I get it now. It's okay to be afraid of those things. It's okay to have fear around, but it's not okay to allow your fear to dictate what you do about it, right? To deal with it, to face it, to explore it, to wrap your arms around it, and be able to say, you know what, I'm gonna go on this journey anyway, in spite of the fact that I'm afraid of it. And that's been really powerful, and that's been a gift too.
Absolutely. We just get to be more real and learn that I always find it so funny, and I talk about this a lot, is how we've so falsely gendered feelings. That we've said feelings are feminine or feelings are masculine, as opposed to they're part of the human experience. And as once you get into recovery and then start being more open and honest, We all feel afraid. We all feel insecure. We all feel shame. It doesn't have to dominate us, and the degree to which we don't talk about it, it does, and that's part of the freedom, I think, that comes with it. So it's wonderful to have you as part of this project. I always
doing the project.
Yeah, thank you. It's just totally spontaneous. I just no thought to it. I just decided.
That's the great thing about Recovery Month, though. People just decide that, like, I'm going to go out and Recovery Month. I'm gonna create. Tim, do you know Tim Raybolt, who's with George Washington University Students for Recovery, and he works for Alterum now. Tim decided I'm just gonna do a Wear Purple Day, and he just put up a social media post. Everyone's gonna wear purple on, I think it's September 21st. But, and this project you're doing, and then, got Tommy Rosen's project, Recovery 2.0, or you've got all these Recovery Month events, Smoking Meat, Not Drugs, in Richmond, or the big event they do that's coming up in Philly this weekend, where they'll have over 20,000 people rallying for recovery. So there's these events all over the country. There's like these individual projects. There's people just posting things on Facebook. How about the, people posting their recovery dates on Facebook? Yeah. I love the work that's being done right now to counter the Ohio Police Department that put that shaming photo online, and then recovery advocates stood up and said, you know what? No, that's not what recovery, is all about. That's not what we should. That's not how you get people to stop using. You get people to stop using by showing them the positive side of recovery, not the negative side. Yeah. So I think it's wonderful. All by the way to say.
Yeah. So just so people know too, right? The hashtag the other side of addiction is precisely what you're referring to. And it is what great timing for that picture. I mean, and it's so funny how life works sometimes to give us that opportunity to really capitalize on something that's getting international attention. So I always love for my guests to have the last word. So I just want to say I appreciate everything you're doing. I appreciate you and your commitment. The growth of this movement has been significant, and your grassroots work those years ago was pivotal. Was absolutely pivotal. So take us home.
Well, I want to thank you, because I stand on the shoulders of guys like you, William Moyers and Carol McDade's and Pat Taylor's, and, the list goes on and on. William White, right? People who really believed in this movement and said that we had to launch a national movement like this. So for me, it's been a real blessing, and it's been a huge recovery support for me to be involved in this. I mean, what better way to maintain your recovery by hanging out with people in recovery all the time and getting to do this amazing work, being able to be on the mall, the National Mall last October with Greg Williams and the United Face of Addiction folks, doing all these amazing things that we've had the opportunity to do. And there's going to be, by the way, more amazing things to come. So I'm really, I'm looking forward in that regard to what's going to be next. There's going to be something big, and we're going to continue to build a great movement. And we're going to change the way people look at addiction and recovery ultimately, and hopefully get it treated as the public health issue that we all know it is.
Awesome. Well, there's the teaser, everybody, from a man who would know. So that's exciting as well. All right. Well, thanks so much, Tom.
Thanks, Dan. Have a great day, and happy Recovery Month.
Thanks. You too.